Hi everyone. Welcome to our to VueDC's Vue Conference 2020 recap. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And I'm Tracey Holinka, and I'm one of the organizers, along with Ben, Chris, and Jack of VueDC. So VueDC has been around since December 2017. We have 890 members, and our first meetup was in December 6th of 2017. And since then, we've had at least one meetup per month. Sometimes we've done a couple. So we've decided during this COVID-19 crisis, pandemic, whatever you want to call it, that we're going to continue to host our online meetings, and we're going to continue the pattern of the third Wednesday of the month, and until things get back to a bit more normal, and we're allowed to have more than 10 people in a room at the same time. So we're kind of getting our sea legs. This is the first time we've done fully remote, so just bear with us, please. So we still have, all our normal Discord channels. We have our website, we have our GitHub repos, and also you can tweet us at VueJSDC. So we're going to have next month, we're going to do it remote. It's going to be April 15th. We're still finalizing the topic, but so hopefully in next week or so, we'll be able to set up that meetup and send out invites to everyone. And of course, we're always looking for speakers. So if you're interested in talking, just, reach out to us, on Twitter or, email us directly. And we'll help you with the topic if you need some help. Okay, so with that, we're going to talk about the Vue conference that was in sort of the first week in March in Austin, kind of the last week that everybody was allowed to travel, so we got lucky with that. So we had these dinosaurs that showed up every once in a while, so that was kind of cool. And behind those dinosaurs were these people. So Ben actually emceed it, and this is a picture of him probably reading a dad joke.
Yeah, probably.
And Jack, our very own Jack, gave a talk on TypeScript, and it was actually a really good talk. And Jack, you kind of convinced me TypeScript's not evil, so that was great. And then a number of people from VueDC came. There's a couple people here that are missing, but we took a picture with our mascot, our dinosaur mascot. So it was actually great to see so many people come from DC.
Brendan, would you like to self-identify yourself in that photo by your T-Rex pose? Could you reproduce it?
The tallest non-T-Rex T-Rex.
Yeah, he actually is the tallest. He rivals Jack. That's pretty good. Anyway, so we can carry on, and I guess Ben, you want to take over?
Yeah. Just as a quick onboarding, so for those who are using sort of Zoom webinar for the first time, I think some of you have noticed there's a Q&A section like on the bottom on your toolbar. Definitely use that to submit questions. It allows you to upvote, and so that way we can sort of prevent repeat questions. And then when they're answered, you should see a tab for that, and we'll make sure to get everyone's questions answered as the show goes on. Given that, so I had the chance to MC VueConf for a second year this year. It was a lot of fun, a little tiring as usual. Yo, what's up, Vince? Thanks for joining. And yeah, it was just a great time. And so I think we were all really grateful to have the chance to get together. It's been 2 weeks since VueConf US, and so I think we can all safely say no one got sick from VueConf US. I think we were lucky to sort of dodge the initial sort of wave, because I think if it happened any later, I think it would have been a totally different story. And then Chris should be able to share. But yeah, Chris will kick it off with Avenue's keynote and Vue 3 stuff. Take it away.
Thanks, guys. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Can I make this small? Excellent. My name is Guirreri. I am a lead front-end developer at Politico. I was really fortunate to see Evan Yu's workshop this time around. I've been to all 3 Vue conferences. They've been absolutely excellent, highly worth going. But I hadn't had a chance to really do Evan Yu's workshop until this time around, and I'm really, really glad I finally got to do it, especially now since Vue 3 is coming, so there's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of new stuff happening. It wasn't just a regurgitation of previous years. It was just really fascinating to sort of see him code and see his brain work like literally in VS Code. So it was pretty exciting. So he gave a keynote, State of Vue Nation, and the state of Vue is really good right now. There were lots of charts and graphs, and he always goes over sort of like the progression of the year and how much popularity Vue has had and how it just continues to grow. And so when those slides come out, you can definitely check those out. So in terms of Vue 3 coming out, it's actually available now as an alpha on Vue.js Vue Next. You can download it and check it out, and start working with it now. As they continue to say, it's really not production ready. I don't know anyone who's using it in production at the moment, but with so many new things coming, it's definitely worth seeing and starting to code with now. But Evan said that it'll be available within the next couple of months. He said by the end of Q1, it will be either in beta or a more stable release. And it's being planned for the next 5 or more years to be stable and supported. So that's really big in terms of businesses taking it on and knowing that they'll have that support over a long period of time. And then the only sort of gotcha is that Vuex 4 and VueRouter 4, which are going to be in tandem with Vue 3, are not actually going to be out until the end of Q2. No big changes in Vuex 4 in terms of the syntax. It'll be pretty much identical, and nothing too terrible. But with Vuex 5, they're going to start integrating the composition API. Evan talked a little bit about how, yes, technically the composition API can replace and do everything that Vuex is doing. But there are so many people out there who have already implemented Vuex and are continuing to use it. And so he didn't want it to be, or I say he, but it's probably a collective, don't want it to be too difficult in terms of moving towards Vue 3 and getting all the benefits of moving to Vue 3. So that won't happen until much later. And then obviously with VueRouter, it's already in alpha. It's really stable already. There's actually a great talk that took place on the first day. And he went over a lot of the new features that are coming. Just in general, I really was digging dynamic routing, where we have these new add route and remove route functions, which you can use wherever you want in your router. But there's a lot to see there, so definitely check out that talk once they're available. So in terms of Vue 3 and the improvements that we're going to get from it, this is basically verbatim from Evan's workshop talk. And I'm not going to go through all of this just because we're short on time. But there's a lot coming. And so in general, the biggest one is the composition API. Slightly related, but also slightly unrelated, is this new setup function, which is actually a part of the Vue 3 component architecture. And this is a new method that's available in all your Vue 3 components, and it executes pretty much before everything in the rendering of a component. But it does come after the resolution of props, and because of that, there's also no access to the local this, but there's a way around that. It takes in 2 arguments. The first argument is props, which correlates to those props that are coming into a component. And that's why this has to render after props that have been resolved. The second argument is context, which is essentially this, but fewer things. It's not just everything that's in a component. And so you'll still use that for things like adders and slots and emit, just like you have with the this keyword. And lastly, the setup function returns anything that you want the template to have access to. And so that allows you to be very, very specific as to what things you want to have prepared for your component before it's rendered. And so where it really gets interesting is when you bring in these composition functions. These are functions that are exported out of another component or another piece of JavaScript. And you can think mixins here, the replacement of mixins and scope slots. But yeah, so these can be used within that setup function to set up your component. And so each of those can take in an argument that acts as sort of a configuration for that reusable code. And it's that way each component can implement the composition function and that block of code in a different way. And so I'd go more into this, but it deserves its own talk, and I'm sure we'll be doing that pretty soon, probably. So concerning the new reactivity system, there's a couple of new functions that are available to us. It's actually a pretty big API, and this is actually available out there in documentation now. But concerning reactivity, there's first this reactive function, which is basically the same as view.observable. You have the ref method, which takes in a simple value and makes that value reactive. You can do that whenever you want. And that returned variable is an object with a single property of that value that you can use as your getter and setter for a reactive prop. Another is the two refs. This gets a little more complicated, but it allows you to link a reactive object to a simple object where each of the properties of that simple object, each of the properties of that reactive object is basically a reference to the original object. So this is kind of hard to explain without spending some time on it and showing you some code, but it's really useful in terms of destructuring objects without losing any reactivity. So there's so much more to see here. I highly recommend checking out Vue Mastery. They have a bunch of excellent courses that were actually free last weekend, but it's really worth that $20, even just for a month, and just to check it out. So continuing on to the improved rendering, the renderer has been completely rewritten, and in Vue 3, the workload of the VDOM has been drastically reduced, giving a huge boost in performance. Evan went into this a bit in his workshop. It's something you don't even really need to code or need to really even think about. It's just stuff that they've really done amazingly behind the scenes. And so one reason for this improvement is that components will only re-render when their exact dependencies change. So a good example of this is where you have a parent and a bunch of children, and if one of those children have its own dependencies that are different from all the other children and the parent, only that child will re-render and not all of them as they do in Vue 2. So that's a huge, huge improvement. Another performance boost is with static elements. So any component that has no dependencies or is just completely static, it will never re-render. It's that simple. And the last thing is ES proxies, which is actually one of the biggest changes in Vue 3. It has actually helped double performance, just this alone. But the cost is unfortunately that Internet Explorer is no longer supported. And so I did want to talk a little bit about some of these cool new primitives that exist. So in terms of fragments, what this means is you can have multiple root nodes in a template element, and you could even just have text in a template element. So this is just a godsend for us. Like, this was always sort of a beast that we all hated, and it will allow us to really change how we structure components. I'm really looking forward to using that. In terms of portals, basically anywhere on your page, you can have an element with an ID attribute, obviously unique. And then anywhere else in your Vue code, you can have a portal tag with a target attribute. And what that means is for things like a gigantic modal that takes over the application screen, it's going to be really easy to just push that content from any other component into that modal. That's pretty much the best example of it, I think. And then there's a new tag a new element called suspense. And what you can do is that setup function that we talked about earlier. All you have to do is add the keyword async before that function name, and you will then have an asynchronous component. And so what suspense allows you to do is have a grouping of components inside of a suspense tag, and it will show a fallback, say a loader, and it will only show that fallback until all of those async components have completed their rendering cycles. And so that's really nice for if you have like a gigantic page and there's a main content area and it has images, and you have other little modules and stuff that you want all of that to show all at the same time after all of them are done, but each of them are asynchronous. It's really easy to set that up.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
I think it was 1 or 2 slides ago, we got a question about the piece that causes IE to not be supported. Can you talk a little bit about the compatibility build aspect?
Yeah, I believe if I'm not mistaken, there are 2 different types of builds in Vue 3. Is that right?
Yeah,
and
that's my understanding.
And so that way you can still get your IE11 support, but you're just not going to get some of those performance benefits. But I think in terms of functionality and syntax, like nothing else changes.
Yeah, I think that's my understanding as well, is that you'll get the faster performance on the build that's intended for newer browsers. But if you need to support IE11, which for us at Politico is that's a concern certainly for us, you can still ship the compatibility build as well, which will be downloaded by the more legacy browsers.
Yeah, and Vue 2 has modern mode, which I believe is extremely similar to that, if I'm right.
Yep.
Let's go forward. I'm almost done. The last thing I really want to mention that I thought was really cool and I hadn't even heard about until this conference was this new custom compiler that's coming into Vue 3, and it was just barely talked about. But what's particularly neat about this is that it's basically platform agnostic Vue code that has almost no connection to the rendering engine. Instead, the rendering engine is something that you build via a plugin. And so this is, in essence, going to make, and Evan said this as well, things like NativeScript Vue, not NativeScript, but NativeScript Vue, will actually become somewhat obsolete because you have this new like internal connection that where you can use Vue code but render in a completely different way. He also talked about WebGL, and someone even asked about WebAssembly, which I've always been kind of curious about. This is an up-and-coming technology that some of you may know about. And he said that it's been experimented with a lot in terms of Vue 3, but because WebAssembly is just so drastically different, there is no VDOM, there's no tree, there's no tree of nodes. Because it's so vastly different, it's particularly difficult to make these 2 things work. But through some sort of middleware, it is still absolutely possible. So it's kind of interesting to see that this will allow us to have completely new rendering pipelines and completely new technologies can implement Vue. So yeah, that's it from me. Thanks so much for sitting and listening. There's so much here to talk about, but unfortunately I don't have forever. But we will definitely be talking more and more about this in the near future. So thank you. On to the next. I will stop.
That'd be me.
Great. So while Tracey's getting set up, we have 2 more questions in the Q&A.
Nice.
The first of which is from Mustafa, so asking whether there was a talk about Ionic Vue at the conference. And so, unless I'm mistaken, there was not. I think you all can confirm.
That's accurate.
But to answer your question, Mustafa, so while there was not a talk, Ionic Vue currently right now is a little bit in a bit of a limbo state because they're actually waiting for Vue 3 to basically come out before they actually sort of release like the next build of like Ionic Vue. So it's taking a little bit of a setback as far as their priorities go. But once it comes out, there'll certainly be more talks, I'm sure, on it. Mike Hartington is probably the person you'll want to reach out more, but I've heard good things about people who've worked with Ionic Vue. So definitely worth considering for sure.
Okay, I went to motion design with Vue, and it's with I'm not sure how I'm not sure how you say your last name. Ben, do you know?
It should be Campioni, I believe.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so anyway, I went to her workshop on motion design with Vue, and so it was a lot less talking and actually a lot doing, which was actually really nice. So I just wanted to point out a couple of things that I found interesting or useful. So one of the things is, and I'll show you I have a slide that lists her CodePen and her, I guess, Code Sandbox profiles, and I highly recommend for anybody to go there and look because she's got a lot of really cool, interesting stuff. So there's two things that a lot of people, at least I do, but I think a lot of people find difficult when it comes to doing animation. And by what I mean by animation, I mean transitions, but I also mean the CSS keyframes. And this is basically mostly CSS animation. It's very little JavaScript. Towards the end, she did Canvas, but that's JavaScript-like, but technically it's not JavaScript. So anyway, so there's this thing called easing, and she has this really nice CodePen here that you can see about the difference in easing and how it's just like kind of the transitions, the motion between one state to the next. This is a really nice CodePen to kind of show you the differences. So that was actually really nice. And one of the other things, she has another CodePen that's on transform origin. Basically, where is your, like, I don't know, your pinpoint? Like, I like the way she did it. It's like it's a note. It has a pin there, and everything revolves around that. And so that's something that I found really nice to illustrate the differences, options that you have. So I'll just go ahead and show you a couple of exercises we had to do. So we had to do this bouncing ball, which is actually kind of cool because the animation I usually do is sort of like little transitions, like, you have a menu and it opens and it slides or something like that. So to do stuff like this was actually really kind of nice. And you can see how the bouncing ball changes its shape. And, that was really cool to have to do that, to figure that out. One of the things that I learned, and here, as you can see, this is the keyframes I was talking about, that I didn't realize. This keyframe has different points, like when you start, like 65% into it, 90%, 100%. I did not realize that you can have this timing function that actually you can have different ones. I always thought you had to use one. I didn't realize you can use different ones depending on what you need. So was a cool thing to learn. And honestly, the biggest thing for me was just like sitting down and doing this, having a whole day to sit down a whole workshop day to sit down and do this was something I never have. So that was really nice. The other thing is that I use post CSS, and I realized with animation that really using Sass is probably a way to do it because you can have some programmatic options. Like, for example, on this, I don't know, is this a squid? Oh, it's a ghost, whatever. These little wavy things at the bottom, it's just one. And you just loop through it to make all the other ones. So I realized that Sass is actually something that's really helpful when you do this kind of animation, so you don't keep repeating yourself. So that was actually something really important for me to learn, that I need to start using Sass again. And these are all public code pens. This is the work that I did, but this is all based on her public code pens. So the other cool thing that I did, which I never thought about, is animating SVG. So that was actually really cool. This is actually pretty cool. Let me just do a refresh and you can see it. And so I thought that was really cool. And there's this trick apparently of using this stroke dash array and offset to make this animation. It's actually really cool. So you can actually do really complex animations with SVG if you want. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So this is stuff that we had to work. We had to make these bubbles. And again, these are all public code, public repos. And this is our code sandbox. And I definitely recommend looking them out. But it's pretty cool because you just follows you around. And this is the kind of stuff that I never get to do. So that was pretty interesting. And then she did one, just you shuffle. So this one actually I could see being useful, making the smooth transitions for the shuffle. And then one of the last things we did was, which is something that I used to do an animation with, is this, but she just took it up a notch. So that's just some examples. And then the last thing we did was Canvas, which is really interesting, and it's very much like JavaScript. I don't have an example of that, but that was pretty fascinating. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of what we did. If you're interested in animation, I just cannot recommend enough go and look at all her stuff because she really knows what she's doing. So let me just quickly, we'll make these slides available, but you can see the links to her code pens and her sandbox, and we'll make the slides, the links available. So I definitely recommend checking them out. And also, I just want to mention real quick, if you ask questions in the Q&A, if we don't get to them, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of this, and we'll get to those questions then. So, okay, sorry. Brandon's next.
I'll take the opportunity to chime in on one of the still open questions. So
Great.
the IE11 reactivity caveats. I don't know if this was addressed specifically at VueConf, but it was the plan before that. So insofar as I'm aware.
Definitely.
So the new reactivity, the comprehensiveness of the reactivity approach in Vue 3 will be because of proxies. And so that means that the compatibility build, it won't be exactly what Vue 2 is using right now, but it'll be pretty similar. And so there will be some of the same caveats about when you have to actually use like view.set. And so for people who have run across those things, it's like, for example, with arrays or deeply nested object properties, there are cases where you need to run into and say, manually tell Vue to set this as a reactive thing. So with Vue 3, you'll still need to do that for the compatibility build. So that might be something to keep in mind, especially if you're supporting IE11. It might require that the way you write the code perhaps looks a little more like a Vue 2 approach. Yeah,
one thing I didn't mention in my overview that I thought was really cool in the workshop is Evan showed a way, and I'll post a link to this in the slides, on GitHub. If you go to the RFCs for Vue on GitHub, you can actually search for specifically, they've been tagging them, breaking changes between Vue 2 and Vue 3. And so what's cool about that is you can actually go through each of those RFCs, there's not too many of them, and see exactly the things that you should be looking out for when migrating code from Vue 2 to Vue 3. But in addition to that, I believe Ben is actually leading on writing the migration guide. It's either you or
the whole doc team. There's a few of us.
So that'll be available. Which is great. But yeah, it's nice that they're collecting all that information together in terms of what you'll have to worry about when moving.
All right, and now that we've taken away all of your momentum, Brandon, please tell us about Nuxt.
Hi, I am Brandon. I've been a member of this group for, I don't know, about a year and a half or two now, but this was my first VueConf. And this conference was the first time I had ever used Nuxt, and really the first time I've ever used Netlify. So this is going to be a really, really cursory overview of just like what was discussed. And the TLDR I'll give you up front is these things exist and you should know about them. So first Nuxt, what is it? Well, it does a couple of things, but the only thing that I can really speak to is the static generation functionality. So if you have a single page app that you've created with Vue, and it doesn't have a lot of like dynamic functionality, it's not calling out to APIs and things, it's not doing anything crazy, you can compile that into a static app with Nuxt, basically pre-compile it, the same thing that your page would do when the app loads, and serve it as regular HTML, CSS. And so I looked at Nuxt in the past, and these were some of the things that I saw in the documentation, and I thought to myself, oh, that's complicated. These aren't things that I need. I'm happy with my single page application. But actually, if you actually get started and go through like the getting started guide, it's actually very simple to get set up with Nuxt, and you don't have to worry about too much of this, depending on what your goals are. So why Nuxt? There were really two main talks that related to Nuxt at VueConf. And the first one was by an excellent speaker named Alex Lichter. That's his website there, and his slides are available. And I highly encourage you to go through and read his slides. But his main selling point for Nuxt, and I thought this was very clever, was to sell it on the point of search engine optimization. So SPAs have limitations that don't allow them to perform as well as statically compiled sites on search engines. Some of the big weaknesses include, social thumbnails, like when you share your site on social media, the inability to generate a thumbnail from that, the high cost, the high risk associated with having bugs in your site. If you don't, if your site isn't able to run and generate the page, then it can't be indexed. You get a load time penalty if your load times are long, and then penalties for things like not having a sitemap or using a virtual router. And so he just sort of enumerates a lot of the ways that Nuxt, through compiling your regular Vue SPA, can help you with search optimization. And the point that he really made was you want to be like helping your users have a better user experience. And through doing that, you'll also get better SEO performance. The second talk was by Debbie O'Brien, and her main takeaway was, when you use Nuxt and conform to Jamstack, and I won't get too much into Jamstack, but the general idea is you need fewer pieces of infrastructure that you have to manage yourself. So just say no to a complicated Express application or Flask application. If really all you're doing is creating a simple CRUD app, then what you can do is have a simple static site, and maybe if you need them, some managed services. And I'll sort of enumerate some of the services that she mentioned at the end of the slides. But my real takeaway here, and what I've found from just playing around with Nuxt a bit, is you already know Vue, so you can use Nuxt to build a static site with good user experience, with great software engineering patterns that already exist within the Vue community, great tools, great libraries. Use those things and build a great static site. The other thing that was mentioned, particularly by Debbie, was Netlify. What is Netlify? It's the same as everything else you're already using, but sort of geared towards SPAs and web development of all kinds. So you can use Netlify to do build, test, deployment, provides a CDN, and paid features like analytics, all of this out of the box. So if you have a project that you can yarn build, then you can plug it into Netlify in like a couple of minutes and have it deployed. So you never have to like type a GitHub pages to deploy script and like fight with authorized hosts ever again. I'm sure people have done that. I'm not even going to talk about this, but Netlify CMS is a thing that exists, and you can read about that. So on the left, a couple of Nuxt examples. Alex Lichter's static site is built with Nuxt, as is Debbie O'Brien's. There are some links, and then some also links to Jamstack resources. Hisora was one that she mentioned, which is basically like hosted GraphQL database. And there's Auth0 and Sentry and such. And finally, TLDR, you already know Vue. So Nuxt is a solid option if you're choosing a static site generator, or you just want to write a simple static site. Maybe things to consider alongside Jekyll or Eleventy, or even templating with Pug. So that's all I've got.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. So who do we have next on our slide?
So I think it'll be me, but Ben, if you want to take a sec to chime in.
Yeah. So Jamie had a question regarding sort of Vue Native with Vue 3. And so for those who haven't used Vue Native before, basically a library that helps you build Vue apps into sort of cross-platform mobile apps, whether it's Android, iOS. Is really, it's sort of like an interpolator, because at the base is still React Native, as far as I understand. But the question is regarding whether it's going to be officially like integrated with Vue 3. So as far as I'm aware, the core team doesn't have any official mobile strategy for supporting it. Chris had mentioned about that, custom renderer. So I mentioned that will help other platforms like Vue Native and like things like NativeScript, for those of people that are so interested in those sort of solutions. But there's going to be as far as I'm aware, no formal like mobile project to support it.
I think if it ever was, it would end up being something like VueRouter or Vuex, where it's still a very different segment, a completely different repository. But yeah, it's pretty interesting how he's made a pretty strong statement that that's not something he wants Vue 3 Core to support.
Yeah, it's just and just as far as rationale, it's just a lot of work because you have to know the Android code base, you got to know the iOS code base,
and you got to communicate with it too, which is really hard.
Yeah,
constantly.
So the core team's goal is to provide like a first-class Vue experience with web, and then by splitting out like the custom render and those sort of things, like then it allows sort of specialists to go off and build platforms. So yeah. And then for those also looking, NativeScript is more or less the preferred, I think, recommended way in the ecosystem, just because it does sort of go over, like it avoids the React Native piece where like you have this other dependency. So if you haven't checked out NativeScript Vue, that's more or less generally the community recommended one for mobile apps. And with that, Jack, take it away.
All right. So I'm just going to be covering a few specific talks. And I guess 4 in particular, and fairly quickly for each of them. There were ones that stood out to us as things that, useful takeaways for us, both in terms of technologies and in terms of kind of developer lifestyle, at least in the case of one, which was a little more of a soft skills talk. The first one that was really excellent was Maria Lamardo's talk on accessibility. She approached it as content loading that isn't broken. And I would say it was probably the best it was the best accessibility talk I've seen. And part of the reason for that is she picked the hardest possible demo, which was a game. So she had implemented a memory type game or kind of a guessing game of clicking between tiles and flipping them over and seeing if you could match. And so that's something that's inherently super visual and relies on a lot of assumptions about the way the web works for what we think of as maybe the average user that we're targeting. But she started and very quickly pointed out all the problems that could be addressed by someone with low sight or someone using a screen reader generally. So by showing this interactivity, then it highlighted a lot of problems that we all face across our applications because we all have interactivity to some extent. They may not be games, but it may be interacting with a forum, or when you click a button, new content appears, and how do you want to let someone know that there's new content there, or how do you want to navigate from the beginning to the next piece of content? While she was going through this, she showed system, both in terms of operating system and in terms of screen reader technologies and browser discrepancies. So she was able to give charts of this behaves this way here and give recommendations about while you're testing your site for accessibility, these are the combinations that you might consider, both of tooling and browsers. And then this is one that I would highly recommend once full talk, both slides or videos are posted, would heavily encourage this because you get a feel for how Maria, in this case, was thinking through the problems. It was a lot of live coding of now that we've seen this behave this way with the screen reader, how can we address that with ARIA labels or things like that? So this one's purely selfish. This was the talk I gave on TypeScript and Vue at Politico, and I'm definitely going to breeze through this. It was primarily part of why I can breeze through this is for at least some of you here, you got a very similar version of this talk earlier, which was kind of talking through how we've implemented TypeScript, both in a general sense of here's what TypeScript is and what it adds on top of JavaScript for a Vue application, and in some specific senses about here's what we've experienced in TypeScript components in Vue at Politico. And so that was the focus of this talk, was kind of the specific experiences at an enterprise scale. So talked kind of about 3 main problems we've experienced at Politico with JavaScript components, where it's you don't get much IDE help when you're writing a component for the first time, or when maybe you come back into an existing component, you're trying to figure out why things are the way they are. And then we struggled with catching breaking changes. So then it was just some straightforward demos of how TypeScript helps solve those problems for us. Also talked a little bit about TS tooling. There was another talk also at VueDC, which was about how we generate API files with TypeScript at Politico. And then there are also some, I think the two main things here for takeaways are, one, obviously the composition API in Vue 3 are super exciting with TypeScript support and the improvements to TypeScript support and the way that's going to allow us to write more TypeScript-friendly code. But then I'd also heavily encourage you right now to check out the Viter template interpolation setting. Slides will be linked. But that's something that any TypeScript components that you're writing today, you can get this huge benefit of type checking your templates, which has been super helpful for us at Politico. So then this was the soft skills talk that I was mentioning. VueConf, we may have mentioned already that VueConf was 2 days, a workshop day and then 2 days of the conference. And then after that, there was a free conference hosted by VueVixens, which was another 5 full talks and I believe 3 lightning talks. And there were a couple really excellent talks given at VueVixens Day. I particularly liked Kim's talk on the 7 secrets of highly successful developers, which of course it sounds a little bit like a BuzzFeed listicle, but it's extremely persuasive because Kim comes in with lots of credibility as someone who's done various developer advocate programs or developer expert programs, been in the industry for a long time, and is talking from a place of what has worked well for her and for people that she's seen as peers. And it's not just the best way to grow your career from purely a salary perspective, but the best way to grow your career and remain a happy and successful developer. So those were the things that stuck out to me. Again, this is one where I'd recommend checking out the slides, even if it's quickly clicking through, just because she's speaking from a place of a lot of experience. So I just highlighted a couple. One, the compare yourself to only one person, and that's you yesterday. I think we would agree there's a lot of mental health benefits to taking that approach. Another one, share your wins. And I liked that she highlighted first person to share your win with can be your boss. Obviously, that's extremely effective and helpful for career development and something we may not be thinking about. What we're working on at any given point is very obvious to us. But taking the time to talk through that with your boss, like, hey, this thing went well, and here's what it's doing for us. And then one other that I liked, obviously Kim's coming from a place of being in the dev community as having some standing of probably having people reach out to her for advice. And so her recommendation is to, once you're doing solid work with career development on your own, to definitely reach out to people, but to reach out to people with a plan for what you're asking for. So to not reach out and just say generally, please fix these things for me or suggest what you would do, but to show that you've thought through what it is that you might be able to learn from this person. And those full slides are definitely available. Again, what we're all showing here, we'll be sending out. And the final one that I wanted to talk about also at VueVixens was this talk by Jess, given fully remotely. So it was one of a couple remote talks that day that was detailing her experiences at primarily an advertising company that does a product of embedded ads, and how she worked with her teams to implement Vue progressively, which I know is for those of us already using Vue may not be as important because it's already in our applications, or we're using Vue from the start with new applications. But in the case of a lot of companies, it's a very solid replacement to jQuery, for example. Like, how can we start adding single page functionality to an application? And so the very useful talk from Jess here is about how you can proactively plan for where you'll add Vue to your application and why. So she mentioned inside out, which is you just pick the smallest possible part of your application that is a standalone functionality. I think she used a contact button, and then you work your way out, but you get it out into your application and into production that simply. Obviously, Vue is a small library, and so from there, then you can build up and you can make that component or that Vue instance start to swallow more of your application and start writing more maintainable code that way. You can also start with the most touched feature, which is a way to force early buy-in because more people are going to have to interact with it. You can start with the most difficult migration difficulty, so that you can validate this path forward. Or eventually, and something that Jess emphasized was they worked through each of these steps. In their case, she showed quarter by quarter that they went roughly in this order. And so you want to end up at user journey where you're able to eventually work with product to plan out, these are the ways that we intend to be utilizing Vue in the application going forward. So would definitely recommend checking out that talk as well. Those slides aren't up immediately, but they likely will be shortly. And it was a really compelling case study of how it worked at her company. I think that is all I have.
Awesome. Great. I think that wraps up for the most part. Yeah, Tracey, bring up the slides. Next one. Are we on to our Q&A round? Oh, yeah, that's right. So,
go ahead.
Yeah. So, as Jack mentioned in the chat, if you didn't see, the organizers from VueConf should be sending out like a link with all the slides and everything. So be sure to look out for that. But also, if you want to actually watch some of these talks, I had a chance. One of the few talks I did get to see was Jack, and it was awesome. So I definitely highly recommend his. But yeah, VueMaster will be hosting them at viewmastery.com/conferences. So be sure to watch those, so you can get the latest as far as the VueConf videos.
And they don't just do the ones in the U.S. They also, I saw they have Amsterdam, they have Canada. So they tend to, whatever conference they go to, it seems like they pretty much do the videos and post them. And they don't post them all at once. I've noticed they post a few at a time. But so it's definitely a good place to go to look at other talks. So
Ben, you might even talk a little bit about VueMastery and how where the profits go.
That's right. Yeah,
I don't know if Ben knows anything about Vue.
Yeah, I don't know. I might not be
someone who's qualified to answer. Like,
yeah.
For those who are not in on the joke, basically, if you didn't know, I do teach a course. I'm teaching a course on component design patterns at VueMastery right now. I have a Vuetify course. But basically, whenever you do subscribe to VueMastery, there is a percentage of your subscription goes back into the Vue.js Open Collective. So you would be inadvertently supporting.
It's 25%.
Yeah, 25%. There you go. See, that's why we need Tracey talking about it. But yeah, so
I'm sorry. Who what's the guy that runs VueMastery? I forget my name. Right. He said it was like last year they donated like $100,000, something like that.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you'll be inadvertently supporting it should you choose to join. That said, I think are we ready to move on to our Q&A?
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess for everyone watching, if you have any questions about the conference, feel free to start popping them in as far as like random things. I guess just to start everyone off, I guess what was your favorite part about attending VueConf? So
and can I interrupt real quick? So feel free to either use the Q&A, typing out your questions, or we'll be watching the attendee list. Zoom also has a raise your hand feature. So if you'd rather just ask your question over audio, feel free to just use that, and we'll enable your audio. But yeah, someone else should chime in with favorite VueConf thing first.
Oh, the dinosaurs, the T-Rexes or whatever they were. That had to be the best.
I would agree that the dinosaurs were quite good. They were a surprise. This is an obscure thing that only I care about, but in our Discord channel, which I'm imagining a number of you are a part of. If you're not, you can find it through the VueDC.io site. Ben had posted, and I had responded. I thought jokingly, telling everyone that Ben would be in a T-Rex suit. It just felt like that would be appropriate for Ben. But I had no evidence of this. I thought I was making something up. And then the next day Ben showed up in a T-Rex suit. So I inadvertently gave that away. If you're in our VueDC Discord, you can get free spoilers for things that I don't know.
Yeah, I remember being like, did I tell Jack we were doing this? I'm just going to play dumb and be like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, that was the right move. For me, I really liked that you get a chance. So in the interim periods between talks, talking with people in the hallway, afterwards at happy hours or before the conference at breakfast or whatever, the people that you're talking to, I really appreciated that it was a way to see other, business experiences with Vue. So if you're just reading things online, then you'll get a lot of blog posts about like, here's how we did this specific thing. But it was reassuring to talk to people who said, we also love this aspect of Vue as applied to our large application. Or we also had this frustration with Vue. And so like finding out how it's being used in the real world to me was really beneficial.
I'll go. My favorite part was actually, I think I had two. One was actually sitting down and Alex Lichter like taking the time to show me how Nuxt, like he helped me convert an app that I had that was just like a static site into a Nuxt app over lunch the first day. And I also really enjoyed getting to see Evan Yu sing karaoke.
That's right. Which song was it? Did you see like the Jay-Z one?
I don't remember. I don't know these songs the kids sing now.
Chris, what about you?
Well, I was really fortunate to, I'm a bit of an amateur photographer at the moment, and I was really fortunate to do some photography while I was there. Just asked the organizers, Vince is on here, but I asked them if I could just take some pictures. And so I have this massive roll of pictures to go through, but like, it was actually really cool to do an event, but also attend an awesome conference. I really loved VueVixens Day. I can't explain that enough, express that enough. Like it's not something I had gone to before, and I'm really glad that they were open to have different types of people there. And there was they were just really powerful talks, and I can't recommend VueVixens enough. It was really excellent.
How about you, Dan?
Also introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey, I'm Dan Silk. I work as a front-end developer for Discovery in Silver Spring. Of course, before the pandemic, I was trying to get a VueDC meetup in Silver Spring, but hasn't. Apparently, it's going to be on.
This is it. This is the Silver Spring DC. It's the first one.
As far as my favorite, yeah, exactly, totally. As far as my favorite part, I actually really liked what's his name, Oscar Spencer's unconventional talk. I really like. I was like, I want to get in his repo like right now.
It was excellent.
Yeah, just seeing somebody do that, like really use Vue as a back-end framework was incredibly interesting to me. So that gave me a whole new perspective on Vue. And then, of course, this was my first Vue conference. So the whole thing for me was really good.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. One of our open questions right now is, I think this might be from Tessa, but Ben, can you talk a little bit about what goes into hosting and emceeing a conference that large?
Yeah, emceeing is one of those things where I sort of fell into it. But basically, it's actually really complicated because I would say when it comes to being an MC of a conference, I would say it's a lot harder than giving a talk because while you're not necessarily preparing material, you basically have to be on the entire time. Like you have to be kind of higher energy, and more importantly, you have to be ready to fill the time whenever something inevitably goes wrong. And so can be pretty stressful, just from a preparation standpoint, because inevitably someone's cable doesn't connect in correctly or whatnot. And so a lot of it is trying to basically keep the whole conference going as smoothly as possible, without anyone really sort of noticing the ins and outs. And what keeps it particularly challenging is that I read this one quote that I really like, is that as an MC, you need to be memorable enough that entertaining enough that you can fill the gaps, but you can't be so entertaining that people would rather watch you than the speakers. So sort of that balance of trying to balancing that value prop. And so, yeah, I think I was talking with Tessa, who's an organizer at Vue NYC, and so we may put together like a little talk on sort of what goes into emceeing for people who are interested in that, and maybe how they might get into it and those sort of things. So thanks for the questions, ABC.
I should have mentioned that the talk on accessibility I loved so much, and that was really excellent, was done by Ben's co-MC. So
yes.
she,
Maria
many hats by Maria.
She did another one at VueVixens, which was also really excellent.
Very heartfelt. Oh my gosh, that one. Yeah.
We had one more panelist who we'd love to introduce.
Hear from. Yes.
She's able to join about what she liked about VueConf.
Hannah, welcome to the stage.
Sorry, I sound bad because I'm sick, and I look bad because I'm sick, so no video for you today. I just wanted to say thanks for letting me participate today. It was also my first VueConf. I had a really great time. Highlights, of course, were T-Rexes. Ben, nice job on that. And I went, the workshop day was really the highlight for me. I believe Dan and I were in the same workshop. We attended the Chris Fritz talk about sort of like best practices for Vue, and it was my first time seeing his repo, the Vue Enterprise Boilerplate. I've already taken that back to my team, and we're starting to look at that for some sort of best practices, about how to organize your repos, which will really help for our large, complex app with hundreds of components. So just certain things like, naming conventions on your component files and things like that just sort of seem sort of, not that important, but it's going to have a huge impact on, the way that we organize things. So I definitely, my team is not thrilled about, doing that right away, but if we start using some or start creating some new apps going forward that maybe aren't as large, we're going to start from that Vue Enterprise Boilerplate as sort of like a starting point. So I'm looking forward to sort of using that and adapting more of his best practices. Even he had, what was the other thing I found so interesting? Like the scope styles versus the style modules was interesting. I hadn't come across that before. And that's all that's really coming to me right now. But thank you for letting me share. And maybe, I don't know, Dan was in that workshop. Maybe he had anything else to add. That's what I thought was pretty interesting. But thank you.
Actually, that workshop was one of the draws for me to want to come to VueConf. I mean, I've seen Chris Fritz's videos and obviously read his documentation. And I actually found Vue Enterprise Boilerplate a few months ago, and I didn't know that it would be part of the workshop. Mm-hmm. And I've been using that as kind of a how to set up an enterprise project. And I actually shared it with everybody on my team and said, this is pretty much how we should be documenting as well, because he's got really good documentation in that project.
Yeah, Chris is a phenomenal educator.
I feel like that repo is like found its little tentacles like in tons of code all over the world. Like it's just so well thought out. I know we have a lot of it at Politico as a base for a lot of the things that we do now. So yeah, it's pretty interesting what he put together.
Yeah, I don't know if he's on this call right now, but Jonas Hassan works with me at Discovery, and he was at VueConf last year in Tampa, and he brought a lot of Chris's patterns to the project that we spent all last year working on. So
yeah, that's right.
It was also pretty cool
last year. Yeah, that's right.
It was cool to actually see him like teaching the stuff that I'm actually doing in the current project that we're also working on. So
very cool.
Yeah.
So we have Brad Balfour joining us as well. Welcome, Brad. What was your favorite part of the conference?
Oh, Brad, you got to unmute yourself.
Oh, you don't automatically unmute me. I have to unmute myself. Okay. So I think the workshop, the Vuetify one that I took was incredibly practical, but full with lots of additional details that I hadn't gotten into, even though we've been using it for the last, 6 months, 9 months. So I thought that was really great. And then I told Jack, I thought his talk was just really helpful and useful for practical information.
Awesome. For me personally, the thing about these conferences, for those who haven't had a chance to attend one in person, I think you've heard from a number of people now that, the talks are obviously a great thing to be there, to hear them live. There's a certain energy about getting inspired to try new ideas. But I think we can all agree that one of the best things about these conferences is that getting that in-person connection with people, whether it's at the after party or just sitting down at lunch with other there was a table of organizers, so I know that a bunch of us sat down with other Vue meetup organizers, and just having to have that chance to touch base and to make those connections. I think it's one of the best parts about conferences like these. And so I think it was Brandon who mentioned that you could have come to the karaoke after party and see Evan rap on stage, he did a stray Eminem bit, and you can just hang out with core team members, and it's just a good time for everyone. Although as far as talks, we mentioned VueVixens Day a couple of times. I think Tessa's talk on components that she did was just fantastic. I definitely highly recommend that. So if you check out the VueVixens
visuals alone are worth seeing.
Yeah, the animations she does are just fantastic. I just blows my mind. Although Chris was like, "You did that in Photoshop." He was like, "What?"
Still can't.
Anyways, but they're absolutely amazing. So yeah, if you ever check out Tessa's talk on sort of putting, she basically talks about component patterns using food preparation styles, bento box versus a hot pot, and it's really a fun talk. Maybe if we're lucky, she'll grace us with her presence and will give a remote talk for us at UDC.
Or a new logo, right, Ben?
As far as VueVixens, it wasn't officially part of the conference, but it sounds like I missed it, but it sounds like it was really valuable. Do you think they'll make it part of the conference next year, or is it just too long of a conference in that?
So technically, it was put on entirely separately by the VueVixens organization, and so in the future, I think in this one it just was planned a little. We just missed the announcement for sort of pairing them together, because I think a lot of people, had they known, would have planned a trip just an extra day to stay, because it was a free conference basically that extended on top of it. So hopefully here's to hoping that VueVixens does it again next year, and then we'll sort of pair it together so that people can know. But it's not officially part of your VueConf ticket, for example.
Yeah. Well, it was free, right? So
yeah, it was free. And then they do have the recording up. Sarah Drasner actually gave a really great talk on the art of comments and code, and Sarah's wonderful. So it was a great talk. There's so many great talks. There's just so many ideas coming away from that. It was great. So I think those are all the questions. Does anyone on the panel have anything else they want to cover?
Hey, Ben, or Jack, sorry. Jack, do you want to talk about speaking for the first time ever in such a gigantic hall?
Sure. Yeah. I butchered it.
Oh, no, he killed it. He killed it.
It was nerve-wracking leading up to kind of the day before, mostly for the sake of our meetups. People are quite generous and accept a lot of stumbling and a flexible time limit and things like that. And it's obvious, and obviously there's time for a Q&A at a meetup. So those two aspects caused a little bit of stress in planning out, trying to be as precise with what you're trying to say as possible so that you can time it out and cover the topics the way you want to. Once it was rehearsed to the point of being the correct time limit and I was able to reproduce that, I felt a little less concerned about it. It helps that the entire community is very welcoming and supportive. I wasn't terribly worried that I'd get booed off stage by anyone other than Ben, and so it was fun. Yeah, it was a very positive experience for sure. And if this is, I don't know if this is reassuring or the opposite of reassuring, but I had applied to that conference along with probably 15 others that I've been rejected from. So if you get one rejection or 14 rejections, there's no harm in still applying. My understanding is it's very much about what the slate of talks that the conference is looking for looks like. So this same talk has been rejected by multiple other conferences. So it was cool. It was a very fortunate opportunity. I liked it a lot.
So hey Jack, how many times did you practice?
I ran through it. So I didn't script it. And so I ran through a rehearsed version of it probably 8 times. And that was, I think it was about 8 times after I had gotten close to the final product. And so I had, run through other iterations of it before that. If any, I don't think we're missing any hand raising.
Yeah, I don't see anything.
So I won't be the one to close this out, not on this momentous day. I just want to reemphasize this momentous day of us not accidentally ending the Zoom call before we were done with it or anything tragically technical difficulties. Bad. Oh, Bart is here.
Hey, Bart's here.
Cool. So
Bart's one of our speakers.
Yeah, maybe we can unmute Bart, but Bart gave an excellent talk on Style Guidist along with Storybook and how those work as 2 different options, sometimes complementary for documenting Vue components. Ben, are we able to just unmute Bart briefly?
Yeah, hang on. Let me just throw him up as a panelist.
Sure. Bart, if you're
up for talking,
feel free to tell us to leave you alone and that you're just here to say hi or attend. But all the people in the call who had been at VueConf talked briefly about things they liked about the conference experience. If you have anything you want to add before we finish up here.
Well, the biggest thing, and I'm sure that everybody has said it already, is you would expect from a conference with 800 attendees, I think we're still looking at the final statistics, but 800 attendees to be like dreading and super like, a chill in the back of your spine kind of thing. And well, because it's the Vue community, you're just among friends, and as Jack was mentioning, you just don't have any regrets when going on stage because you're just there to, talk to friends and make sure that they enjoy what you're going to say. So yeah, having the community around us was awesome. And yeah, the idea that the whole, so I was surprised, and I already apologized to, I don't know if I did apologize to Ben actually, but I said I was wondering if there was any water just before my speech. And Ben literally ran to get water to get me water before the speech, and I drank half of it before I got on stage. And so this whole environment, this whole idea that it's not speakers are king, is that because users because the people that came are there to enjoy the community and the camaraderie. We all focus on making their journey as good as possible. So yeah, I definitely, if you have one conference to submit a talk to, it's definitely, it should be, especially if you're passionate about Vue, it should be one of the VueConf that exists. I heard that VueConf Amsterdam was super good as well.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Bart. Thanks for stopping by also. And it looks like we did have one Q&A question here at the end.
Yeah. I can take this one. So like any other technique and methodology that's available to you in Vue, the composition API is additive. It's a progressive enhancement that should your code base require the need to break out functionality and sort of using the composition API, then by all means, yes, it would be technically preferred. But there are also times where that is overly complex and you simply need the options API. So like anything else, do what works best for your code base and your team. There is no singular, always use props, always use slots. There are context is really important when making these decisions, and they are supposed to play well with one another. So hopefully that helps to answer your question, Arthur.
And if I can say briefly, we think about at Politico often we think in terms of TypeScript benefits, and there are cases already where we're thinking, this specific component would benefit a lot from using the composition API. And that could be one direction we end up going, is most things use the options API, and then there are certain ones that we think would benefit a lot from having that type of code sharing, for example.
Exactly.
It's definitely the momentum moving forward is the component of the composition API. So I think it's definitely something maybe on new projects you should definitely be using, but that's just me.
So I really enjoyed the talk on the composition API, but I also have questions because in some ways I feel like maybe some of the problems that Mixin had, the compositions API will have too. Like I'm not 100% sold on it.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of best practices and stuff that will need to come out of practical usage, and similar to Chris's Vue enterprise boilerplate, there will be patterns that emerge over time of when it's good, when it's bad. That's why why it's recommended not to just immediately rewrite your whole code base using composition API. That's not the point of it. It's, as Jack mentioned, like as you see cases where it makes sense, start pulling stuff out, start playing around with it, seeing what works best for your code base.
Right.
Cool.
Okay. Any other questions or? No. Okay. So I sent out on the chat, but we created a feedback form, and we'd like everybody to fill out to let us know like what we could do better, what went well, that kind of thing. So we'd appreciate it if you could fill that out. And I set it out in the chat too. Great.
And then one final announcement, actually. So we're actually looking to do, the Vue community is working to work on a global meetup event. So it will probably be happening sometime mid-April. So check out, keep a watch out on we'll make sure to post in VDC, but basically there will be a global Vue event that we're planning to do remotely across the world. So keep an eye out for that, for more news on that on the way.
Oh, if you want to, one question for you, Ben, if you want to talk during this world event or this world meetup, and you're expecting to want to do, how can you do so?
Yeah, so we're going to formalize a CFP process. I think right now, since it's the first one, it most likely will be meetup organizers nominating their own local speakers to fill in certain time slots. But once we figure out the infrastructure for this, it certainly is planned to do more formal sort of CFP processes, so that people can have the opportunity to speak to a global audience and to have a chance to practice their talks, which if we record them and then allow people to upload it to their own YouTube channels, we're hoping to really surface a lot of these speakers through this initiative. So looking forward to seeing what comes of this.
Someone say it's over.
I can't remember who it was that I heard say this, but if you really, really, really want to get a slot to speak, don't just submit one topic. Submit 3.
That is correct. And submit different topics, different types of topics, case studies, and just, definitely a good piece of advice. Thank you for that reminder, Dan. Cool.
So I think that's it. Shall we wrap up?
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I guess we'll see you next month online, and we'll keep you posted based on the status of everything. All right, take care.
Great, thanks everybody. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks everyone.
This was great.
Nice shirt, Chris.
That looks like from the first conference.
That's right. Bye, everybody.
Cheers.
Bye.
Peace.